So much for joining and happy 420. I'm Delegate Brooke Lehrman. It's great to see you on here. Unfortunately, our Facebook Live doesn't seem to be working, and so we're going to be recording this and then sharing it on Facebook and on YouTube. But thank you everybody on Zoom who's joined us. It's great to see you all. Again, I'm Delegate Brooke Lehrman, and I represent, along with my teammates, Senator Bill Ferguson and Delegates Robin Lewis and Luke Klippinger, the 46th District in Baltimore City. And we are, I'm so grateful to have you all here with us today. I'm delighted to welcome you back to my Briefing with Brooke webinars. I hosted over 35 of these last year based on topics that were of interest to Marylanders, especially, of course, as it related to the pandemic. And just this last week, I kicked off my 2021 series of briefings, which will run through this spring, summer, and fall. And you can keep up with all the briefings at brookelehrman.com/briefings with Brooke for a full schedule of events. And if you have ideas on things you'd like to hear about, please let me know. Each webinar features experts on the topic we're discussing, and today I'm really excited to have a dear friend from the General Assembly and a real leader on these issues, two real leaders on these issues, to talk about marijuana policy in Maryland. So I'm joined by Delegate Jazz Lewis from District 24, who's been a leader and champion for criminal justice reform and drug reform and juvenile justice issues in the Maryland General Assembly, and Luke Jones, the director of the Maryland chapter of the National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORML. NORML's mission is to move public opinion sufficiently to legalize the responsible use of marijuana by adults and to serve as an advocate for consumers to ensure that they have access to high quality marijuana that is safe and convenient. So why is this important? Why are we doing this? Well, you know, I have to say that hundreds and hundreds of my constituents reached out to me this session advocating for the legalization and regulation of cannabis. And you know, for years, I've co-sponsored and supported this idea, when done in the right way, to make sure we're enfranchising people of color who've been so long, you know, been penalized for marijuana, and you know, just the ongoing enforcement of marijuana prohibition. It financially burdens taxpayers, it encroaches on civil liberties, it engenders disrespect for the law, it impedes legitimate scientific research, and of course, it disproportionately impacts communities of color. You know, just one example is that Black Marylanders are 264% more likely than white people to be arrested for cannabis possession, even though they use at similar rates. You know, so it's just another reason that the prohibition really needs to end. So I strongly support ending our current prohibition and taxing and regulating marijuana usage. And Delegate Lewis had a bill that took so much of what needs to be done to make sure we do this in the right way, because we've learned so much from other states and what they've done. And his bill this past session really took everything we've learned into account. And so I'm really honored to have him here with us today. Delegate Lewis is an alumnus of the University of Maryland. He began his career as a community organizer in Baltimore, which taught him that quality jobs pay living wages and then change communities. Jazz has successfully campaigned and supported the efforts of hardworking Democrats in the state of Maryland and beyond, and he currently works as a senior policy advisor for Majority Leader Congressman Steny Hoyer. He served on the House Judiciary Committee for several years, and he now has moved over to the Money Committee, a great committee, my former committee, the Appropriations Committee, and he is chair of the Maryland House Democratic Caucus. Luke, grateful to have you here as well. Luke Jones is an advocate and a public administration professional who lives in Montgomery County with his wife and their two children, also under 10. My two kids are also under 10. And Delegate Lewis has a 6-month-old as of today. So, Luke has worked to improve intergovernmental collaboration between tribes and their federal, state, and local government partners for more than 30 years. He's been a federal government employee for more than 20 years and has held a number of management level positions, advising political appointees, members of the Senior Executive Service, and Congress on a range of management and program administration concerns. He's a recognized state and local government regulatory program administration expert. So it's great to have you both here. Really grateful to you for taking the time. And we're going to start with Delegate Lewis talking with us a little bit about his work, his efforts in past years, HB 32, you know, why is marijuana reform so important to you, and what's next? So I'm going to kick it over to you, Delegate Lewis, to take things off. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here on one of these briefings with Brooke. Watched them over the pandemic, and I thought it was a great outlet to give information to citizens, both in your district but across the state. So thank you for organizing it. I know you and your team has been a labor of love, but all of us watching, it's been much appreciated. Yeah, I had House Bill 32 this year. Briefly, I'll tell you how I came around to the issue. So not everyone knows this, but my mother served 30 years in DEA. She was one of the first women, let alone women of color, in Drug Enforcement Administration. So drug policy in America was always a common talking point in our household, particularly her raising a Black male son, and how, you know, sometimes it would put her in an awkward position of trying to enforce the law coming after the 80s and 90s and the crack cocaine epidemic and stuff like that. And then seeing the disproportionate arrests of young people of color in particular, particularly for nonviolent arrests. And the triggering point for me was, like Brooke said, I had a baby boy last year. And during the pandemic, when my wife was pregnant, it just started, my mind went to a place of, I'm excited to have this baby boy, but knowing that he is going to be young, Black, and male in this country, he's going to move from being cute to something else in some people's eyes if we don't change policy here in this country. And one of the things that we decided to look at was marijuana policy. I put together an informal work group of legislators within the Legislative Black Caucus to talk about this issue, to see where they were. I knew we had overwhelming support within the House Democratic Caucus writ large, but we had some serious questions on when we talk about equity in the industry and who needs to benefit, what does that mean, particularly for people of color? So a lot of hands was on the bill. And I was glad about that. We brought in experts here in Maryland, but folks from across the country who have passed their own bills and heard some of the things that they regret and wish they had done differently, so that we could try to incorporate them in our legislation. Our bill, it allows for the auto expungement of records immediately. And I think that was critically important, because you can't allow a legal industry for folks to be making millions of dollars off of cannabis sales, while other folks who did the exact same thing had the scarlet letter of a criminal conviction hanging around their neck and holding them from getting gainful employment and things like that. So we worked with the judiciary on trying to figure that out. Our judicial record system is very complicated. We're still working on that, but they are in it with us hand and foot. One of the other things that we did, other than criminal justice reform and expungement of records, is that we realized that the communities that have disproportionately bore the brunt of mass incarceration and incarceration for cannabis deserve the reinvestment in those communities. I mean, when you think about all of the people who were arrested and either they were away from their home, and that's income that's not coming into those communities, as well as if you have a criminal conviction, you're not reaching your full earning potential now. We deserve to reinvest in those communities. So we created a community restore and repair fund where money would be going to those specific communities that had to deal with over-policing and mass incarceration. And we decided, you know what, those communities know what's best for them. So we put in the bill language for that each jurisdiction to set up advisory boards where the state would manage the fund, but the advisory board for those areas would be able to dictate what it went to. So whether that was scholarships or housing for the elderly or more jobs program, they would know what they needed most. 63% of the revenue went there. One of the things that I think made our bill stand out was that over and above what we just did through settling the lawsuit with HBCUs in the state of Maryland for $577 million, we made giving revenue to our HBCUs a line item for these proceeds to make sure that they are well positioned to compete. We didn't make it conditional of them creating programming in cannabis, in the cannabis industry either, though I do hope they do. both from a workforce side and a research side, start to step in, because across this nation, we have underinvestment in researching how various drugs and policies affect people of color. We make sure that workforce development was in there too, that, for returning citizens and others, employers would be paid, they would be subsidized to hire these folks. And then when they can see that, like, look, they can do the job, right? You're more likely to keep them on. We ensured equity in the industry through social equity licenses. We've seen that, when you use race-specific language, it is often struck down by the court, but we have other public policy tools that we can utilize to reach the same aims. If you were someone who was formerly incarcerated or the relative of someone who was formerly incarcerated, if you come from one of these disproportionately impacted communities that I referenced earlier, you could get a license as a social equity business, which means that you can get low to free capital from the state to start up your business, free counseling, help, and the like. There will be some licenses set aside for you, some tangential industries that is exclusively for you, like security and transportation. And one of the things I thought was really critical to our bill, which I know my good friend Luke Jones is going to talk about soon, is that we allow for home grow of small quantities, the same way that if someone wanted to start their own little, brewery just for them and their friends at their house, if they're not selling anything, you can do, right? People use this medicinally, so they know what's best for them. But we keep it to a reasonable amount. We also allow for micro grow, and this is critically important if we're ever going to address the disparate industry outcomes that we've seen, where, in Maryland, despite it being one of the most diverse nations, one of the most diverse states in the nation, we only had 3 Black owners as of last year. That is like utterly unacceptable. And I think that one of the biggest issues is that when you have a closed market and you have to spend a ton of money on licenses, well, the wealthiest people are going to be the ones who win. Okay. And that just to start, and it's not to say that we don't have wealthy folks of color, we do, but that shouldn't be how we are designing industries here in Maryland. And microgrow allows folks to get in where it is more affordable for them to, and they have the opportunity to compete in the market and grow. We got some pushback from the industry on that this year. That is one of the reasons why the bill didn't end up moving forward, but not the only. I think the critical thing that slowed it down more than anything else is that, there's this little pandemic going on that kind of sucked the oxygen out. And we did amazing work. I'm proud of the work we did. Delegate Brooke Learman is a leader. She passed 15 bills this session. And for you all who don't track, it's not that easy to pass that many bills in one year. But we got so much done on so many fronts. So I'm not upset, and I don't think anyone else should be. But I do want to put this in perspective. We passed an initiative that I worked on for years called racial impact statements to review policies from an equity lens. And when they reviewed this bill, some of the data we got back from the executive branch showed that every year in Maryland, 15,000 people are arrested for cannabis possession. Okay. So, 2021 wasn't the year, 2022 needs to be the year, right? And an additional 15,000 people will be arrested this year based off our data. And it's preventable. We don't have to keep doing it this way. So I'll stop there. I'm sure there are a ton of questions on taxing and licenses and, who knows what else. The last thing I will add that there are some other things that came up at the very end of the session that I thought was really good. I want to give a shout out to Delegate Ampry. He's one of our newest delegates, and he worked with me to try to set up a pilot where the law schools for Maryland, UB in Maryland, seeing if their law students could provide free legal help to these social equity businesses when they get started. So
I love that. Yeah.
Which is amazing. So thank you for having me, and I'm more than eager to answer any questions.
Yeah, no, this was great. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it and appreciate your leadership on this. So we are going to share screens now because Luke has, here we go. Luke has some slides to take us through. And Luke, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time, your energy, your efforts, the labor of love, I know. So we'll turn it over to you, and thanks for walking us through things.
Absolutely. And, I think that I would like to thank the voters from your district. I had a chance to review not just bills that passed, but also bills that you sponsored. And I was tremendously impressed and encouraged.
Thank you.
I guess District 20 of Montgomery County, where I'm from, isn't the only great.
There are good people
place in
all over.
Maryland.
I love your legislators in District 20. My brother lives and his wife and 3 little girls live in District 20. It's a great district, but you know, we got some good liberals up in Baltimore and all over the state. So we try to, you know, do good bills.
I'm going to rush through because I don't want to bore people with you know, I would love to hear questions. I can talk you know, a great deal about the bill itself and the policies involved and what it means, you know, to the sort of rank and file person. But I also, you know, need to start by commending Delegate Jazz Lewis because of, as you heard in his summary of the development of the bill that he brought to the General Assembly this year, he was a very active listener and a very engaged policy development leader. And the resulting bill and the quality of the policy reflected in the bill is a testament to that leadership. And, you know, the participation that he proactively brought into the process early. And so I really appreciate very much that leadership from Delegate Jazz Lewis. So, you know, my name is Luke Jones. I would like to start by advancing to the next slide, because I do like to have a basic disclosure statement, which is that our organization, we have no paid staff at the state level, okay? It's entirely energized by citizens that are committed to ending marijuana prohibition and moving the policy conversation forward so that the public policy actually reflects, you know, the views of the public. We don't have a vested interest that way. We don't have any paid lobbyists, for example, that type of thing. So we're not a professional at the state level, but we do use the infrastructure at the national level, you know, to support our state level work and to make sure that our the quality, you know, of the content that we're bringing into the conversation is in fact fact-based and evidence-based and state of knowledge from a national organization's perspective. I disclose that too because it's a little unusual for, you know, advocacy organizations or lobbyists or people sometimes, you know, to be able to make a disclosure like that. And at the end of my comments, I'm going to sort of emphasize why I'm making that such an important part of my introduction statement. So if we could go forward, I'd like to say, you know, our primary objectives here is to address this ongoing disproportionate, you know, application of these laws, and, you know, and so we look at the actual numbers involved. And this is from the Maryland 2019 Uniform Crime Report. I've, for comparison purposes, used a table from the report that shows a 5-year trend. And so what you can see is the overall number of arrests for drug-related violations has gone down somewhat. The percent of the arrests that are represented by marijuana arrests has actually, as a proportion of those arrests, gone up. And we'll talk a little bit about this slide before we move on, just to help people understand what it's showing here. And that is that in Maryland, we classify these arrests in 2 major categories, one being for sales and manufacture, that's like the traffickers. And then the other is just mere possession charges. And in some cases, the possession charge has been pleaded down from an initial charge, say, of trafficking, but they plead down to possession or something. So it's a set of records that are managed in a very inconsistent way across the whole state. And so it's an interesting area of discussion about how we get into expunging these records off of people's, you know, and what the volume of this workload actually is. Because when we look at what marijuana, the prohibition of marijuana, what it means in terms of the overall conversation about police, and how we train our police and what we ask them to do. If we're trying to roll back this marijuana policy, we're also talking about rolling back a significant amount of actual work that these officers have been habituated to. We've asked them to do this work, and they're very adept at it, some of them. And what are the numbers? We're talking about, for possession alone, 15,000 arrests a year. Now, that's not all Marylanders. My understanding, you know, is that these can be people coming through the jurisdictions. There may be repeat offenders in there. So it's hard to just say 15,000 Marylanders or 15,000 individuals. And so I wanted to caveat that. But the numbers that are not reflected are the encounters between the officers and the citizens. The encounters are many times more than these numbers, because not all the encounters lead to an arrest, or an initial encounter may lead to an arrest for another charge. So the number of arrests that are actually triggered, you know, by this, is the encounters, you know, are many times. And sometimes it's that encounter that imposes that initial harm on the citizen who's being encountered. It doesn't always have to result in a charge to have a harm. You know, the harm is psychological. The harm is a sense of belonging to the community. The harm is felt in many different ways. And it also hurts more than the individual involved. It hurts their position within their family and position within their the confidence that they bring forward into moving forward, you know, in life, and feeling confident about the world that we live in because of these encounters and because of this punitive response. I want people to think about 15,000 in terms of 12-inch segments of feet. That is 2.8 miles worth of feet. So if you think about wherever you're watching this from, getting up and you go for a walk and you don't stop walking for almost 3 miles. And then you think about that in terms of how many feet did you travel? That's a lot. That's a lot. That is a daily constant assault on, you know, between the individual and the most punitive expression of government. So as we think about police reform for us and for me personally, dealing with the marijuana question is central to that. And we can move to the next slide. So let's just bring up the information on the slide. I mentioned that ending the possession arrests, you know, was our primary objective for the legislative session in 2021. You can go ahead to the next slide, and go ahead and bring up the content. And what the slide asserts is that people who engage in unlicensed commercial activity, they need business licenses. They don't need criminal records. Okay, and the way that we structure the legalization bill, okay, will either set up a process whereby only a few people can participate. Thereby, we're going to have to use the police to go after individuals who are trying to subsidize a portion of their income, especially at an economically stressful time. right? An individual who might earn a few $100s a month, you know, supplying cannabis or marijuana, risking arrest to do so, that may mean eviction or paying their rent, right? So we're going to talk about that as I wrap up and turn it back over to you. But the reason that the conversation about House Bill 32 is so exciting, you know, and motivating for us is that it starts to address these issues. The reason the policy embedded in 32, House Bill 32, that Jazz Lewis brought forward is thoughtful about this is because the concerns about these types of concerns were heard, you know, in the policy development process. So we want to create a process that builds bridges for people into the legal economy. We don't want to build bridges for just certain people, you know, to enter legal economic activity. And that's really, really critical. So I really appreciate you pausing on this slide. And if we could go, I think, to the last slide, and I'll wrap up here by letting everybody know that this is the heart of the testimony that we submitted during the Legislative General Assembly session that we submitted in support of House Bill 32. And what we're happy to report is that House Bill 32 satisfies all of the major concerns that have been raised by the cannabis consumer community. Those specific concerns are ending marijuana-related police encounters and arrests. Obviously, I spent some time describing that to you. Establishing a right to cultivate personal use of cannabis at home for non-commercial purposes. This is, again, not an encouragement to people, but it's a trigger for police encounters into the personal private space that people should feel secure in. The critical bullet on this is market access for small businesses, including cottage industry producers, that's a home-based business, and other micro businesses, subject to reasonable licensing, right, and regulatory standards. Arrest record expungements and targeted investments that repair some of the damage caused by prohibition. So with that, those are the key policies that we've been working on, and we're happy to report that we're on the threshold of adopting these policies here in the state, thanks to the leadership of you know, elected officials like you and Delegate Jazz Lewis. So that's really what I wanted to provide. Thanks for listening to all of that.
Sure, of course. Yeah, no, thank you. That was really helpful background and information. It's a huge problem. And I haven't given a shout out to Senator Feldman, but of course, Senator Feldman's been working on these issues in the Senate as well, which is great. So we have a few questions that people both wrote in, people have been chatting me. So a couple questions, and I'll punt them to either of you who'd like to jump in and answer. So get ready to unmute. So the first question is, you know, what can be done or what is being done, or are there plans to educate users of marijuana, especially like 12 to 18-year-olds, on the negative medical consequence of use on the brain for young kids who, you know, their brains are still forming. So one question is, what is being done about that? Any thoughts on that?
Sure thing. And one, I also want to thank Senator Brian Feldman, who I see he's on here too.
Oh, he is? Oh, great.
Yeah, at least I see the name.
Oh, yeah. Oh, hello, Senator Feldman. I didn't even see you. Welcome. You're welcome to join us and say a few words if you'd like.
Yeah, so I'd like to call him up if he wants to speak.
Yeah.
So I would say one of the things that we dedicated revenue for in House, I think it was in Feldman's bill as well, but definitely House Bill 32, was into educating people of the dangers of abusing drugs, and not just cannabis, but also tobacco and alcohol, to make sure that young people in particular aren't abusing, aren't getting more access than they should. They are appropriately educated. And the data I'll throw out there, the data I've seen from folks who have researched this issue in Colorado and California is so far is demonstrating that in legal environments, access for teenagers is actually going down because the illicit market is being disrupted. Okay, it's about 15% or so, so nothing drastic, but it's a good indication of why we need to legalize, because it will keep cannabis away from children and all sorts of drugs, right? But cannabis away from children until they're old enough to get access to it, the same way we would treat alcohol.
That's great.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about this, which is that you know, all of us have, I think, we're all three presenters here. You know, we started off talking about our roles as parents to young children. And I think we all share concerns about keeping our children safe and teaching them how to make healthy choices in their life about things that might present harm to them, including this. And so I think that what happens, generally speaking, once a transition like this happens, is it turns out to be largely anticlimactic. And what we find is that, you know, kind of normalizing it helps in a lot of ways, because you know, it doesn't become this mysterious thing you have to go and explore and use it in inappropriate ways, because people, you know, have incorporated it into the society in an unhealthy way. So in societies where it's not criminalized, you see, police officers don't help this question. You see, we want to drive youth use down. Nobody wants youth to be using products like that. But police don't help achieve that, right? Public education achieves that, the normal things we do to keep our kids safe.
Right.
So, you know, I would just encourage people not to think about it as some
it's the age old don't do that. And what
right. Oh, exactly.
I want to do that.
Exactly. I was reading I was reading Harry Potter last night to my son, and they, you know, the awful one of the awful characters banned all the students from reading a newspaper, and so every student got the newspaper and read it. Right. I mean, the surest way to make sure a teenager wants to do something.
I mean, you know, I wouldn't recommend people leave marijuana around like newspapers, right? But the point is that I have ice cream in my freezer, but my kids don't go eat the ice cream for breakfast because they're right. So, you know, having electricity or things that are dangerous in the home doesn't mean we need the police officers to come and keep our kids safe from it, you see, and marijuana is no different than that.
Right. Yep. Understood. So Andy Messick has a question as well. What sorts of things are being done for people with records for possession after it is decriminalized to help people who had that what we've seen, right? This snowball effect where folks lost their jobs, their homes, had their credit scores. I will never forget when I was door knocking, when I first ran for office, I knocked on the door of an older African-American gentleman who said his dream was to become a police officer, but he got in trouble with drugs. And so he had a record, and he'd been working at fast food, restaurants his whole life, basically. And I just kept thinking, what a waste, right? What a loss to society that we don't get to benefit from his talents. So, this is, of course, a really important question, expungement, of records and making sure that that can happen in an easy way. I know you both and Senator Feldman are interested in that. So what are your thoughts, and how does this bill address that? Is that addressed elsewhere? What are you thinking?
So, yes, it does address it. First, I'll say, back in 2012, we decriminalized, at a small amount. And the issue with that, and another reason why we need full legalization, is because essentially law enforcement are able to do the eyeball test. So I think it's currently in, what is it? Is it 2 ounces? I think we have it at. No, it's at an ounce. It's at an ounce, and I think we have a bill to move it to 2 ounces this session. But Brooke might be driving a car and gets pulled over, and the officer's just like, oh, you know what? I think that's half an ounce, right? I might be driving, the officer looks at it, and I have the same amount that she has, and I think that's a pound.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not carrying
Yep.
scales. So that's a problem, which is another reason why we need to legalize. And we don't ration out when you go to a liquor store. You can only get one bottle of wine, before you go home. That is all that is permissible.
Yeah.
But in the bill, we had it set for, like I said, the auto expungement of records for simple possession, but an expedited process. If you had, let's say, charges that was more than simple possession, think of like, low, nonviolent, but low level people who are dealing, so now you're dealing with possession with intent to distribute.
Yep.
For indigent persons, we had in the bill for our public defender's office to help them go through the process for the expedited expungement.
Yep.
And we're 100% in support of that as well.
Good.
So we had that separate from our bill. I think there are things that, Job Opportunity Task Force and other folks have been pushing to use that alternative ways for credit for people. Because once your credit is messed up, it's a bigger issue.
It is. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Yeah, it was a really all-encompassing bill that you and Senator Feldman have. So another question that was sent in, why can't otherwise eligible individuals have a Maryland firearm permit and also be prescribed medical cannabis? That is one I don't know the answer to. So kicking it over to you guys again.
I'll try my best and I'll kick over to Luke. He might know more. My understanding is, my understanding of this is marijuana is a Schedule I drug. And that's the nexus why.
Got it.
But Luke may know more.
Yes, I do. And am I off mute? Yeah. So
I
wanted to let folks know that while under the Obama administration, there's a famous reference to this Cole memo. People go, oh, I've heard of that, but maybe I don't know exactly what it is or whatever. But where the Department of Justice federally had issued a memo, that clarified to the states that the federal government is not going to enforce if the states meet the following standards for regulating, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's another Department of Justice memo, federal memo, that weighs in on the question regarding firearms, not at the state level. This is a federal. So at the state level, they reference guidance from the Department of Justice. The reason we can have the medical program, the reason states can move into the regulated adult use space is that the Department of Justice and the states have negotiated standards for what that actually means. Now, in the area of firearms, there's a federal policy that says there's a presumption that you're a Class I felon if you're a registered medical patient. So the advice from the feds is to the states, you can't put the individual in jeopardy by giving them permission to go into your cannabis dispensary, make a purchase that violates this other law pertaining to firearm administration standards. And so that's the standard. And the state will not change that policy until either political leaders decide to disregard that memo, which some states have chosen to do, or not. And right now there has not been in Maryland any interest in moving until the feds. And the good news is the feds are moving it. So that impediment will probably, in my view, coincide with when the next time the General Assembly is wrapping up next year. We may have a different federal standard even by then.
Oh, that's interesting. That's quick by federal movement.
They're working on the bills, and Chuck Schumer has promised to bring it to the floor, and the House has already passed the MORE Act. So
great. Okay, that's good to know. Another question is something that we covered in police reform this year, which is about hiring of police officers. And when will the Baltimore City Police or other police departments start hiring former cannabis users or current cannabis users as police officers? Any?
So they'd be happy to know that in the police reform package we just passed, you can't disqualify someone for
Right.
current cannabis use. So
Yep. We're doing it.
yes.
Yeah. It's an
We
important
got
part
it
of
done.
police reform. I think everybody was keeping an eye on it. All the pieces were moving, and that one was a really important one. Yep, absolutely. There are also a couple questions about the legal use of age, and 21 and other years versus 18. You touched on this a little, but do you want to talk a little bit more about 18? Why not 18?
I mean, my strategy has been to keep it consistent with
Tobacco.
alcohol and tobacco,
And alcohol.
which is all 21.
Right.
So.
Yep. No, I hear that. And I think, it's ease of use, ease of, explanation to our young people, that this is the age. So Luke, do you have any other thoughts? Yeah, it looks like you did.
I do. I have some very specific thoughts about it, because we, in 2017, began to compile a list of policy goals for our organization. And one of the ones that kept recurring was this issue of the age of adulthood. And I'd like to just take 1 minute, Brooke, to make sure people understand the issues, because we as an organization advocate the age of adulthood for cannabis to be set to 18, not 21. So the rationalization for 21 has really been driven by public health and public safety concerns based on science. And there are particularly deadly associations that are statistically significant for young people's consumption of alcohol. Most that was a Trans Am, by the way. I don't know if people heard the Trans Am driving by, but particularly deadly and statistically significant associations between alcohol, and we're most familiar with traffic safety, but other indicators of safety as well. And so, 21 was imposed for alcohol for very, very clear reasons that do not exist in the area of cannabis. And so the data to support the argument, it just isn't there in terms of cannabis. And adults are defined under the law as an 18-year-old, okay? They sign contracts, they can have children, they make life or death medical decisions for other people, they can operate special equipment, they can, all of the privileges and responsibilities of adulthood convey, okay? So why would we deny them access to a legal commodity? There are many legal commodities that present potential risks based on consumption that are parallel to or much, much more significant than those posed by cannabis.
Yep. No, understood. It's I think it's a good and healthy policy debate and decision. So,
more than 70% of polled elected candidates for elected office that participate in the NORML survey support 18, and we were shocked by that, because we thought that the percent
would be higher.
Would be
Yeah.
much smaller.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so a couple people had questions on, here's an interesting question. What if cannabis is federally legalized? What are the next steps in Maryland then? Of course, part of that would depend what the legalization legislation at the federal level would look like, whether it would kick it to the states to implement, to be sort of the permitting and the regulating, which I assume it would. But any thoughts from either of you on if all of a sudden Congress this summer decided that they were going to do the right thing?
I would love for that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I would love for that. I think it would make our argument way easier, as most of our cannabis policy is tied to federal policy. So if it's no longer illegal federally, then what are we doing?
Yep.
From a financing side too, it would help us out tremendously, because currently, it's a cash intensive industry, because because it's
Yep.
illegal federally, you can't use
The banking. Yeah.
can't use any of the banking infrastructure
Right.
we currently have. So the bill was us trying to recreate that
Yep.
in some fashions. And if we don't have to, it's just helpful, right?
And safer, right? I mean, safer for everybody because it doesn't have to be all in cash. These stores won't have large, sums of cash inside them. They're really can be
The
targeted.
security costs will be
Yeah.
less,
Right.
because these stores, I mean, they literally have to drive cash to the comptroller's office
Right. Right.
to
Yeah.
pay their taxes, and
Right.
and that can be dangerous. We've seen in other states of
Yeah.
some dangerous interactions of people trying to rob them when they do so.
Yeah. I want to, sorry, you go quick, Luke, and then I want to wrap up with a final question on next steps.
The biggest impact in Maryland is going to be the arrival of interstate commerce. We still will have an in-state regulated system after the federal government takes its action. But once interstate commerce hits, all of these projections that we make associated with the value of the current licensed Maryland producers is going to pale in comparison to who owns and controls the brand distribution contracts.
Yep.
That's a conversation Jazz and I have not had, and it's the area of current most concern to our membership, because while people are so concerned about talking about the value of licenses, which have a very limited shelf life of value, the value of sales and distribution contracts, which is actually what people are getting arrested for, by the way.
Right.
These are the things of value in the future legal interstate commerce market. Those contracts are being consolidated right now with the national leading brands. And so, we have a lot to talk about with regard what it really means in terms of cannabis business operations versus the investment portfolio. And this is the thing that Jazz's bill has understood from the start.
Right. And that's, I mean, I think that's, I think most of the people probably on here understand, right, how important it is that we get that piece of this right? That it's not 2 or 3 big corporations who own the entire market for sales and distribution of marijuana in our state, and that this really can be a way to create a new industry and to create wealth among many, Black Marylanders, Latino Maryland, people have been, who have borne the brunt of the prohibition for years and years, and it would, the right thing to do, and frankly, the economically, the economically good for the whole state is to make sure that there are multiple licenses, that people can create these small businesses and really grow their prosperity. Because that creates more, when we have more financially resilient businesses, it creates, our communities will do better. There's more benefits the tax coffers of the state. It's just better all around for all of our communities. So the last question, just a couple minutes each, is, so what are next steps? How can people support your efforts, Senator Feldman's efforts, NORML's efforts? What should people do to make sure that they are ready to go and that the state's ready to go next year on this and to get this done?
I think we're going to first thank you, Brooke, for having this conversation. It's much appreciated. I think, like I started with, we didn't have enough runway this past session because of all the other things that's going on. I think that sets us up very nicely for this upcoming one. So folks who are interested in this issue, continue to reach out to me, reach out to Luke, reach out to Feldman and Brooke. I think we are going to be studying this issue over the interim in a way that, we can have a bill that's ready. I think House Bill 32 is a great framework, but, like Schumer said 2 hours ago, if the bill, if cannabis is legal, of course, we're going to have to make some tweaks, right? So we're having this conversation, and we're looking forward to making sure we have a bill that's ready for next year.
That's great. Luke, final words?
I really appreciate the role of the citizen delegate. So Brooke and Jazz, and if Senator Feldman is still there or other representatives joined, we tip our hats to you, and I thank the the voters for sending you guys to represent us, and you're clearly doing a great job with that. And so I just offer my thanks as a citizen, and I'm sure this policy is going to change next session one way or the other, and it's going to be for the better. And so we appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for your leadership, and Senator Feldman for leadership on this issue. Here is our contact information, so feel free to get in touch with us as we move forward. I think, we're all very hopeful that Maryland can move forward on this issue that has really, plagued us in a lot of different ways for so many years. So it's a new day, and we have 9 months right now to organize. The countdown starts now till next session, and we'll be ready to go thanks to the leadership of Delegate Lewis, Luke Jones, and his colleagues, and Senator Feldman. So thank you all of you for joining us today. Be well, stay safe, wear a mask, and enjoy the sunshine out there. Take care. Bye.